look at this pop-up here. So this one's a little bit different, and it's not just because of this guy here. It's because of this button. So this button, it basically works by closing the pop-up and scrolling to a point on the page. And believe it or not, this currently isn't possible with Elementor. So currently what you can do with buttons is you can link them to close or open pop-ups like here, or you can link them to a point on the page. You can't do both simultaneously. So if I X this, I can link it to a point in the page, but it will no longer close. So today I'm going to show you how you can create a pop-up like this and how you can create a button like this that when clicked, it'll close the pop-up and scroll to a point on the page. So to start building your pop-up, you want to click on templates and pop-ups here, add a new template. It should default to pop-up. Just give it an optional name and click create. So I've started one here called discount build. You'll be presented with an empty box. So stick a container in here. And what I've done is I've added all the elements I'm going to use in my pop-up. I've not styled any of them yet. They're just there. So I've got something to work with. So then you're going to want to go into pop-up settings, and I'll show you what I've changed the defaults from, because there's only a couple I've changed. So by default, I want the width to be 500, and then I want to change the entrance animations to fade in and fade out. I want these to take 0.4 seconds, so don't put 400 in here like I did originally, because I thought it was in milliseconds, and then I was waiting 400 seconds for my pop-up to fade in, which was a little bit confusing. So I'll leave that as 0.4, and then in style, I do have a background on the pop-up, but here you can't set a background overlay, so I'm going to do that in the container instead of the pop-up settings. Here I just want to add a solid border of 2 pixel width. I want this to be white, and I also want the border radius to be 12 pixel. And then finally, the close button, I'd like it to be 12 pixel away from each side. So I set that here. And then I'd also like it to be, rather than black, I think I'll set it to grey because it's a bit easier on the eye. So I'll just go in here and set it to 0.5 opacity. So that's the pop-up settings done for now. We don't need to do anything in advanced yet. I'll just add some custom CSS later on for mobile. So now we can start styling up our elements. So we'll start with the container. We'll set this to full width, and we'll want this to be set to row so that our buttons can sit next to each other at the bottom. So once we've set this to row, we'll want to set this to wrap so that they can fall, all the elements can fall on top of each other. And then we'll also want to justify content to the center like this. Now we can go into style, and I can set my background up. So it's classic, and it's a picture, just a picture of me at my desk. So this one. And then this image, I'll position it at the bottom left. And then I'll make it no repeat and display size contain. So I just sit there like that. And then once that's done, I want to add a background overlay. And I'm going to use light body, which is a global color I've set up of 0.9. So I'm very barely visible there. Otherwise, it can look a bit too much. And then after this, I just want to set my border radius to 12 pixel, just so it doesn't, nothing overlaps the actual edge of the pop-up. So 12 pixel border radius. And then after that, just go into advanced, and I want to set up a 2 pixel rem of padding for desktop. So that's that one set. So that's our container done. Now we can work on our image. So we've got the none other than Michael Scott GIF. So if you've seen The Office, the American one, you'll know who this is. Whoa. Close. What is going on there? Get rid of that. So we'll give this a style of 12 pixel border radius. And in advanced, I want it to be a custom width of 160 pixels. That's all we need to do for now for that one. So moving on to the heading. So this is our 20% off heading. So I'm just going to write 20% off. And I want this to be, I'll leave this as a H2 because it's the main heading of the pop-up. And then within style, I want the alignment to be centered. And I want typography. I've set up a global font here for my pop-up heading. So it's hard to see at the minute. So what I'll do is I'll add the text stroke. I want a 1 pixel text stroke. So you can see it now. And then accent 2, that's the color I'm using, so pink. And then I want to add a text shadow. So this shadow, I want 0 blur, and I want 4 pixel horizontal and 3 pixels vertical. And I've just got a note here with the color I want to use. So I'm going to set a pink color in here. So that's the color. It gives it this 3D effect for text shadow, which I think pops quite well for the pop-up. And then text color itself, I want that to be white, just so it stands out even more. And then within advanced, I'm going to give this a width of custom 45% and set it to grow so that it fills the space. And then the last thing I want to do with this heading is just give it a negative 18 pixel margin at the top, just to pull it up a bit, because it does have a bit of a gap above it by default. Just realized I've missed off my percentage. So that's the text, the main heading, and the image done. So my next heading, so I'm going to start this one by just copying in some text. So this one, I've used a span tag to separate the first bit of text and the second one. So here you can see I've put span and I've given it a class of premium pop, and then I've closed the opening span tag and put premium. I've closed the overall tag and then I've put hosting. So this premium is within this span tag with a premium pop class. I'm going to give this one a H3 tag, and I'm going to go into style, align its center again. This one, I've also got a global font already set up for my heading 2. And then text stroke, I've set this as 1 again, but this time it's now my accent color, my main accent color. There's no text shadow on this one, and the text color itself, I'm going to set as light headings. And then within advanced, again, I've got some custom margin just to shift it about a bit. So I think within the top margin, I've got 4 pixel. And then left and right, I've got negative 8 pixel. And if you use negative margin on the side of containers or anything actually, if text like this one, it means it can sort of break the layout slightly and fall outside of its own content box. So I don't mind doing that on this occasion because it makes it pop slightly more. So it sticks out a little bit more. And on top of that, it usually it sits within it slightly, which I didn't want. So I'm going to set that as 8. And then underneath, I've got -12 just to pull the other items up a little bit. This does annoy me with Elementor sometimes when you try and put minuses. There we go, -12. And then the final thing I'm going to do on here, because I've set premium pop-up as a class, I can now go into custom CSS and manipulate that class. So I'm just going to copy in a little bit of code that I've used. So some custom CSS here for premium pop. And I'll tell you what this is doing. It's setting the color to my accent color. So that's my accent color. It's the same color as the outline. And it's taking the outline, the text stroke, off the first word. Otherwise, it'd look slightly larger than the second. But I want it to look exactly the same. So that's the next heading sorted. So onto the next heading now. I'm just going to copy in my text, which is when you purchase web support through us. I always want my web support line to be on another line. So I've manually put a line break in here. And then I've also put a little handshake emoji in. And on Windows, it's the Windows key and full stop. You can choose any emojis there. Not sure what it is on Mac, but it'll be the equivalent, I imagine, Windows key and full stop. I'm also going to set this to a H3. And then within style, I also want this one centered. I've set a global font for pop heading 3. And then I also want my text color to be dark. These are all global colors I've set up. And then typography wise, all my global fonts, I'm using NutraText if you're wondering what the font is. So I'll set that back to heading 3, and then that's this heading complete. Onto the text editor now. So I can copy in my text here. I want this to be center aligned body text with 2 pixel paragraph spacing and my body global body color. Button wise, I want the first one to say view our support. And then I just want to link this dynamically to our support page. So that's content type. And then I can search for my website support page. So once that's linked up, in style, in order to get these buttons fill in the space at the bottom of the pop-up, we'll have to set this to stretch here and then in advanced, set size to grow. So that'll make sure it fills the space. And then finally, I've got a button class for these buttons as button outline dark. So I've just set up a class which makes the button styled up like this. So you can style this here in the style tab, but I've just set up a class to make it quicker. And then the second button, this one, I want to say hosting packages. And this one is going to be the one that closes the pop-up and scrolls down to hosting packages on the page. So the way we're going to do this is within link, we want this to be set as the close functionality, and I'll explain why shortly. So here, you're going to want to go into pop-up and set action as close pop-up, and then that one is set up now. All we need to do again is go into style, set it as stretch, and also set it as grow. So that's our two buttons set up. So now when we publish our pop-up, we get to choose some display conditions, and I want mine just to show on the hosting page. So I'll search hosting and set that page to on, and then the trigger, I want it on page load, and I'll just put 2 seconds for now for this tutorial. And then I just want it to show once per session, but I'm going to set it to 10 per now, so I don't need to keep starting new sessions for this tutorial. So I'm going to save that. And now once this is published, we can go to the hosting page and refresh, and it should pop up after 2 seconds. The only thing missing is this button works and goes to support. This one is just set to close, because as I said earlier, we can't set it to close and scroll. So for that, we'll need this code here that I'm going to provide in a code pen in the description. So this code, the only two things you'll need to change is the packages trigger and the packages ID here. So this trigger, you could actually leave this the same, but this trigger is just the ID of the button. So the button ID is this button here, and it's within content, the content of the button, there's a button ID field. So you can set that to whatever ID you want, but for me, I want it set as packages trigger. So I'll publish that. And then the other ID of packages is the ID of the container on the page that you want the page to scroll to. So for me, on my hosting page, I've got this section here called packages, and I've given it an ID of packages. So on click, the page will scroll down to this section. So if I now copy this code in to a HTML tag on the packages on the pop-up editor, so HTML, and I'll put this in 2 script tags, and open and close, and then paste it in, and then I'll also set this HTML tag to position absolute, just so it doesn't mess with the layout. And I'll publish this now. And now when I go into my website hosting page and refresh, and the pop-up appears, if I click the hosting packages button, we now close the pop-up and scroll to the correct section. So you might be wondering why I've done it this way around, where in the button, I've set the link to close the pop-up rather than in the button setting the link to scroll to the anchor point, which is the packages section on my page. And I've done it this way around because within here on a link, if you have it set to scroll to an anchor link, you can't set a delay. And in the code, you can here. And I've set a delay of 300 milliseconds. And you can see the comment here, I've put a delay to avoid scroll bounce, because I noticed a really odd behavior where if your pop-up is triggered, not by page load, but if your pop-up's triggered by clicking on a button, then if you click on the link here, which should scroll to your packages or we're at a point on your page, but you haven't got a delay, it can bounce. For some reason, it can get bouncy. So in the code, you're able to put a slight delay and it eliminates that issue when you've got your pop-up triggered by a button click. So again, I'm not entirely sure why it's doing that, but it is a behavior I've noticed, and that's why I've done it this way around. So in here, stick your link as your close button, and then on top of that, you can delay this, which I also think looks a bit smoother when it's got a 300 millisecond delay, because it gives your pop-up chance to close. So my pop-up closes, if you remember, it fades out after 0.4 seconds, which is 400 milliseconds. So it's mostly faded out, and only then does the scroll animation start. So I think that looks better, a bit easier on the eye and a bit better for user experience doing it this way around. So I hope that's cleared that up. I know it's a bit confusing, but that's why I've done it this way around. So now we've got this code added, the next thing I want to do is make sure this pop-up is also visible on my support page, because currently under display conditions, I've just got it set for my hosting page. So to do that, I'll simply add my support page here. And now this pop-up will also display on my support page. But we need to change the CTAs for the support page, because we don't need a button saying view our support when we're already on the page. So what I'll do now is I'm just going to duplicate these two buttons, and we'll sort of inverse the buttons depending on what page we're on. So I'll just rearrange these. So we've got a set of buttons at the top for the support page, which are already complete, and then a set of buttons at the bottom that will be on the hosting page. Sorry, the other way around. Set of buttons at the bottom that will be on our support page. So I'll internal link this to our hosting page instead of the support page. And then hosting packages will now say support packages. And then the last thing I need to do with these buttons to make sure all four of them don't appear on each page is set in advanced here on each button some display conditions. So page title is hosting. So I'll set that for the first two buttons. Advanced display conditions, page title is hosting. And then the next two buttons we only want on our support page. So display conditions again, add condition support. So this is a good little technique if you want to have pretty much the same pop-up, but with some minor adjustments depending on what page a user lands on. So I'll set this to support as well. And now if I publish that, this pop-up will now appear on both pages with the relevant buttons. And this button will still work for support packages in that it will close and scroll, because on my website support page, I still have a container with the ID of packages here because I have support packages here. So then if I view this and now wait 2 seconds for it to load, you can only see the two buttons here, view our hosting and support packages, which works correctly. And if I go to the hosting page, it should take 2 seconds to load. And it says now instead view our support and hosting packages. So it's only showing the relevant buttons based on the display conditions. Now, if we go into advanced rules for the pop-up and set this to once per session, that means no matter what page we land on, if we land on hosting first or support first, they'll only ever see this pop-up once because it only is one pop-up. If we built two pop-ups and set both of them to display once, there'd be a risk of a user seeing the pop-up twice just because it exists twice because of the buttons. Whereas this way of doing it, where we set display conditions on the buttons, means we can build it as one pop-up that only displays once per session. So I hope that makes sense. So the last thing to do, which is super important, is getting this pop-up fully responsive. So I'm just going to get my notes up here so I remember what I've done. So on tablet, we want the padding here. I'm going to set it to 1.75 for tablet. That's 1.75 rem. And then for mobile, I'm going to set that to 1.5. So 1.5 for mobile. So here it is, nice and skinny. So then next up on mobile, we want to go into settings, pop-up settings, and I've set the style of the close button. I've brought it slightly closer to the edge of the pop-up, which is 8 pixels away. And then I've also set the width of the pop-up to 90%, or sorry, 90 viewport width. So you can see here it fills the space, but leaves a slight gap. But then I've also set a media rule in custom CSS here of the max width to be 320. So the pop-up on mobile screens will only be 320 pixels wide at all times, because otherwise it'll mess up the positioning of the fonts, of the text, sorry. And then if it ever gets below this, it'll default to 90% viewport width. So now going back into the container, I've set align items here as center, and then I've reduced the gap slightly in the column to 12 pixel, and then I've left row as 20. And then the image, I've now brought it in slightly to 110 pixel, which is a custom width. The heading, I've changed the margin bottom to -2. And then I've also give this a custom width of 130 pixel, which is very close to its actual width. I think that pretty much is its actual width, which means it'll break onto a new line if necessary on very small screen sizes. And then custom CSS here, the percent off, the text shadow is quite heavy. So what I've done is I've set, because text shadow isn't responsive, I've give this an ID of percent off, and it means I can target it with a custom CSS media query to lighten this text shadow. So if you look, you see how it went a bit less dramatic there. So if I delete that, you can compare what happens. And that's because under style, this text shadow isn't a responsive feature yet. It should be in version 4, because I think everything's responsive now. But currently, it's just a quick media query to make the text shadow responsive. The next heading I've tweaked again, just for margins to get it fitting on one line. So I'm going to unlink these, and I'm going to set up all the margins here. I usually, when it's negative margin as well, I've noticed Elementor is a bit weird when you're typing in negatives. So if you type them as positives first, and then put a negative sign in front of them, that can sometimes be easier, because they can behave a bit strange. But now you can see this all fits on one line. And then the next heading, again, it's margins. So just to space it out a bit better. So we've got -6 here, 0 and -4. And then the text editor. So for this one, I've changed the margins. Loving the margin changes at the moment with these. So that's -6 and -2 on the bottom. For this one, I did also reduce the font size to 14. So it's body font for all the screen sizes except mobile, it is 14 pixel. And then paragraph spacing, take that down to 0. And then button wise, just for transparent buttons, I've pulled the button underneath up a bit by giving the transparent buttons a bottom margin of -4. So these buttons, there's only 2 of them visible per mobile, just like the other screen sizes. So you won't see all 4 of these. And then this one again, -4, just to bring them slightly closer together. So that's it set, fully responsive now. On mobile, I'll just hide this HTML. So this is what it looks like. What I'll do is I'll put a screenshot up now on mobile, just so you can see exactly how it looks. Because sometimes the preview on a desktop doesn't represent a mobile accurately, so I do recommend looking on mobile screens physically when you're testing for mobile responsivity. Now responsivity is done, that's everything. So yeah, there's a lot going on with this one, but there is a few different functionalities with the closing the pop-up, scrolling the pop-up, using custom display conditions, custom fonts here with some classes. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this one, guys. If it has helped, give it a like, give it a comment, let me know what to do next. And yeah, if you want to see more, then feel free to subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next one.